guess I want to ask a little more questions about the Kickstarter. What decided you guys to go to Kickstarter? I mean, you started moving to other venues. You mentioned Comixology, Comic Press. You started moving to Nook and Digital. So what gave you that push to go to start a Kickstarter for it?
Just to supplement our publishing efforts, for printing and for getting more writing talent to do one-shots.
Oh, that's cool. Have you considered, I guess, for your Kickstarter to offer like some rewards? Like, say, if I donate $20, I'll get like a signature, or I'll put my names in the credits. Have you started doing any things like that to entice people for the Kickstarter event?
The Kickstarter already finished, and we succeeded. We did 220%.
Oh, that's awesome! That's amazing.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
That's pretty crazy. Pretty crazy.
No, every Kickstarter who goes in, any amount gets a thank you section. The ones who put 20 get a bigger, bolder letters for their name. They get a signed comic book, and they get a print. And I think the $35 level is the same, but it includes a T-shirt. The $50 level included the trade paperback. So it's really, I think we gave a lot of value for our Kickstarter for the backers.
That's pretty cool. And I guess I want to go into Mr. Parley. You speaking to me earlier. You recently came back from a Sherlockian convention. What was that like?
It was very unique. That was a couple weeks ago in Hanover, Maryland, and it was called the Scintillations of Scions. And there was about 100 people there. They all, gave presentations for about 15 minutes, and you had some really, I would say, upper crust Sherlock folks there. You had some folks who wrote Sherlock books. They were called pastiches. You had some other mystery writers. You had people who just study Sherlock Holmes for a living. It's just just a big meetup of really hardcore Sherlock fans, and I was really flattered that they contacted me to join them. And I gave a presentation on Watson and Holmes and how we respected the canon and when we departed from it.
That's cool.
Wait, so these guys reached out to you, Brandon?
Yes.
Wow, cool.
That's amazing.
That's really cool.
That's really cool. That's cool. And I guess before I move on to my question about it is like, you mentioned you met these Sherlock guys who not write the fiction, the people who knew the fan fiction. Did you get that random question from that guy? Hey, I don't agree with that. Watching what, did you get that random annoying question you just rolled your eyes at yet? Where you were there, did you get that random question? It happens.
Not yet. They're extremely supportive, actually.
Thank God.
Best back.
That's good. That's good.
And I think the fact that we were very straight up that, hey, we are not canon, and the fact that we're doing these changes, we can actually make these changes.
More Sherlock is better Sherlock, man. That's what I say.
Definitely.
Well, there's definitely always a place for more intellectual style detective work, rather than a lot of the more CSI style detective work you often see in a lot of shows or materials today.
It looked like this woman was just murdered.
Wait. It gets worse. And when they see an ice pick, it looked like the ice was just put on sunglasses, dry. I'm like, God.
Yeah, you guys are horrible.
Hey man, it's on TV. It's there. I don't know why. Someone's watching it.
So that is the one thing I think you can't really mess with in Sherlock Holmes. I mean, you can change his clothes, you can change his race, you could probably change his gender, you could do all kinds of things. But the one thing that I think the community would really chase you around with pitchforks for doing is screwing up the deductive reasoning. If the clue, the closeness of the observation and the deducing of the clues and all that kind of that trademark Sherlock stuff. If you did away with that or you messed it up somehow, I think that you'd pay with this community. So that's one thing you got to get right.
So there will be no scenes of him where Holmes put on sunglasses saying something really cheesy. That's not happening.
Well, I think the trap that we have to avoid going forward is it's fairly common too in comic books. Unfortunately, is taking it easy on ourselves on the writing side. Taking easy ways out. handing the clues to Holmes just when he needs them, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I noticed that it's in certain comics, especially in other noir type comics. I would say, I guess I can't really think of any right now, but you could just kind of see that he just randomly get this clue, or I get it moment, or just that like you could feel as if the writer himself is ready to drop this for you to find it. If you ever play any point and click games, like those old school point and click games, and those items just conveniently work in that keyhole, I kind of see. And one of my questions I want to ask you is, from your experience, your previous experience working in other comics and publishers and whatnot, how do you think that shaped your ability to write a detective story?
Well, it's interesting because this, I think, was my first real, hard detective story. I guess I had dabbled with detective-type stories when I was working for Marvel. Definitely stories where you had to figure out, who was responsible for the big whatever happened.
Right.
But this was the first time that it was ever in my face, and I was aware that, wow, I'm writing a detective story. But I have to say I had a lot of support from the whole Watson Holmes team, Rick, especially because Rick is a huge Sherlock Holmes fan, and he was kind of very stringent about, I guess, maximizing the mystery wherever we could. And, the whole team was very great, and, you couldn't ask for more than that as a writer.
That's cool.
Rick?
It's a cracking good read.
Yeah, cracking good show. Cracking good show.
It's brilliant.
Yeah.
It's fun.
It's fun.
So,
Of course. Anything that wouldn't be elementary.
Well, so let's turn the spotlight a bit more on you guys. So, Carl, could you tell us more about where you went to school and how you grew into the writer you are today?
Well, I went to college at SUNY Purchase, which is in Purchase, New York, in Westchester County, and I studied English there, and that was where I got my my internship at Marvel in my junior year. And I just had a blast there. It was where I always wanted to be. I'd wanted to be a writer, and just work in comics, I think, more so than actually be a writer. And to finally be there, when I was in college, that was great. And when I got out of college, I got a job there as an assistant editor. I had sold some stories when I was an intern, some short 8-pagers. And so they knew that was what I wanted to do. And I was really lucky to have some editors there that were, willing to help me cultivate my skills. And, after a while I started doing it more and more. And when I left staff, I was writing also. I started writing Sonic the Hedgehog for Archie, in addition to writing some of the X-Men characters, notably Cable.
What was your years on Cable?
I wrote this Cable Machine Man annual. Funny enough, that was drawn by Rick.
That thing was awesome.
And
plug.
A Machine Man Bastion story where basically I co-wrote that with Michael Higgins, and we basically told the origin of Bastion, this X-Men character who was the big bad guy. So that was
that was Operation Zero Tolerance.
Yes, Operation. That's really good. I didn't remember that.
So, what is your favorite story? Again.
My favorite noir stories are. I really like the Maltese Falcon. I also like the Big Sleep.
Nice.
Just a lot of the classic, old, hard-boiled, gumshoe detective stories.
So, moving on to Rick, where did you got your art education, and how do you get started as an artist?
I around about 1980 or so, I wrote up a Spider-Man story, and then I drew it up in pencils, and then I inked it, and then I had it all photostated down to actual comic book size, and I sent that off as a submission to Jim Shooter at Marvel. And I think I actually, about a week later, sent an identical package to DC and sort of stood back to see, who was going to answer first. Turns out neither of them did.
Ooh.
For quite a while, and I had to go kind of hunt the packages down because, photostating was expensive at the time, and I at least wanted the originals back. Turns out that both outfits had the same reaction. They were completely unable to evaluate anything that I'd sent them in terms of whether I'd make a good penciler or not, because the pencils were, vanished underneath all the ink and all the balloons and too small to read anyway. So I finally got this phone call from Shooter explaining all this to me, and he said, well, why don't you just, do 2 or 3 pages of, basic pencils of maybe Conan holding an axe or something. Send that up. And I was like, duh, of course. And the rest is history. But that's an example of what not to do if you're trying to get a job in comics as a penciler. If you want to be a penciler, show them pencils.
You gotta specialize.
Yeah. Well, you gotta be. If you want to be a tap dancer, show them you can tap dance. Basically.
Now, Rick, do you still have your samples?
Yeah, somewhere.
I would love to see those sometime, man.
They're pretty awful, but they did show a basic knowledge of anatomy, and that's pretty much all they wanted at the time. Shooter, I don't know if this is the case anymore, but Shooter at the time felt like it was fairly seriously part of his job to teach the basics of storytelling to every incoming penciler. So, so they weren't expecting you to be able to do that. They just wanted to make sure you could draw.
That's very different from what's going on right now, because they expect you to do the whole shebang straight off from the back.
Well, and you can, without getting too snarky about it, I think you can sort of see the results, that sort of approach.
Yeah. Was this, you mentioned that he wasn't concerned that much from anatomy. Was this during the era where they started picking up McFarlane and Liefeld and those type of guys?
Well, those guys sort of sailed in maybe, I don't know, I think they all broke in.
I think that's like maybe 10 years after you, Rick.
Yeah, but I think even Todd served Todd and Frank Miller both served an apprenticeship. If you look hard enough, you can actually find stuff that they did, that's in a much more conventional sort of mode. As Shooter always liked to say that you had to learn the rules before you could break them, and of course, I think that was his way of justifying everything that happened afterwards. But it's a good rule.
It is.
Yeah, it would. And asking the same question I asked Carl, what is your favorite noir type stories, detective stories in general?
I like. Generally, I like. Like I said, I like the old hard-boiled gumshoe detective, where it's one character and he's trying to solve a crime, and there's the femme fatale. I like a lot of the old, like the Humphrey Bogart movies in particular.
Yeah, I had a huge Humphrey Bogart phase where I was watching everything he was in. And those old black and whites are really very instructive from the point if you're a penciler, just because of the way they set up the planes, the way they use massing and shadows.
Yeah, actually, that's something I found that's been I feel is a lot lacking from a lot more recent movies, where a lot of the older movies have a lot stronger framing as far as scenes go.
Yep.
Than a lot more recent movies do.
Yep.
All right, and finally, Mr. Publisher.
Yes.
How did you got started, and where was the genesis for this idea?
I have a totally different direction where I started. I'm an insane comic fan. I loved comics for years. Went to School of Visual Arts, and I studied illustration and comic book art, and I actually had guys like Joe Orlando, Carmine Infantino, and Walt Simonson as my teachers.
Awesome.
But I ended up getting into visual effects because the comics industry at the time was going through a bad turn, and I had to find a field that was, more stable. So this was around 95, 96. And, I spent years in visual effects.
What type? Computer visual effects or animation?
Computer visual effects.
Okay.
It's mostly commercial work, some feature work. I've worked on the first 2 X-Men movies.
Wow.
Worked on Too Fast, Too Furious. I also did, which was that Mel Gibson movie about the Apocalypto. I did some work. The last big movie I did was Zodiac. Did a shot for that. Literally, a shot. And a lot of commercials. A few, winning. What's that award for commercials?
Commercials?
Yeah. I won a few Clios.
Yeah.
I did a lot of work for Digital Domain when they were still a healthy company. I finished a few years ago doing a lot of work in LA. I just, got tired of visual effects. The business is just now unstable, and I decided, I really want to do comics and move back east to be near my family. And a couple of years ago, I started New Paradigm, and basically it was my friend Paul Mendoza, who's the colorist on the book. He's also the co-developer of Watson and Holmes, so we both, about maybe 3 years ago around New Year's Eve, we were talking about stuff, drinking and stuff, and talking about what characters would be kind of cool to read. I was like, why haven't they done a African American Sherlock Holmes? Because I think that'd be a really cool idea. And the next day, after getting some ideas in my head, I started talking to Paul how it could work, and Paul came up with some other ideas, and eventually Paul came up with an overall outline for the first story, and that's what we had to give to Justin to then send to Carl. We had another writer originally on it, but didn't quite hit the tone we were looking for. So that's why I ended up having Justin pick Carl, because he was like, what, this guy's going to knock it right out of the park, and you're going to be very happy with it. And he was right. Justin's been really good, and absolutely essential for the company because of just his vast knowledge of different things and his super Rolodex.
Super Rolodex.
Please tell me more about that Rolodex.
It's a magical Rolodex.
It just comes with an encyclopedia of knowledge right there.
What's great about Justin is that he has the knowledge of someone who's an editor, but he also has a large knowledge of being in the print division of Marvel as well, so he knows both sides. So it's from start to finish, he knows how to do things.
I think that makes a lot of sense, especially given how, with penciling, and if you're having a pencil-heavy book, there's a lot that can go wrong.
Yeah, the nice thing about Justin is that he's very much in contrast to the editors that I've had experience with, who basically just open the packages, maybe check for spelling, but mostly just spend their time hassling you over deadlines. They don't really, add much to the product. They don't seem to be much of a resource when it comes to solving problems and making stories better. So Justin's not of that breed, which is good.
Or there should be like that.
Have you guys read any other recent comics in the same genre as Sherlock, Watson and Holmes? Any other contemporaries that you've taken a look at?
Let me think.
Yeah, I'm trying to.
I think it's more for me. We were looking at the BBC one, we actually developed Watson and Holmes before CBS actually put out their first episode of Elementary. We actually had the first issue out even before CBS had their first episode out. We actually had it digitally in August of last year, and CBS didn't have theirs till September. But that being said, I think for me it's just wanting to have something that's like really good crime books. Actually, I was looking at a really good one, the one that what you call it, Sean Martinborough and what's his name, Walking Dead guy created. That's
Kirkman.
Yeah, Robert Kirkman.
That one's really good.
I guess the last good crime comic that I read. Well, I love the Torpedo stuff.
I was gonna say.
But Torpedo's awesome. Let's give props to Torpedo. But I like Criminal.
Yes.
I think that was the last thing that I read.
Brubaker, right?
Really
Yeah, it's Brubaker, yeah.
And Sean Phillips, right?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And what about you, Brandon?
Oh, I mentioned, that's what I was mentioning before. I mentioned Teeth of Thieves and yes.
Teeth of Thieves and Criminal.
Yeah.
Rick?
I'm not really. I can't really think of any crime stories right offhand. But what I like about what you need to be able to do, and actually ties back to something that one of you said at the very top of the interview, is one of the keys to understanding Sherlock Holmes is locating him in his city. The fact is that Sherlock Holmes is a much weaker character if he's not firmly nested in an environment. So what I really like about this is that it puts a real premium on drawing the backgrounds, on setting the scene, on the furniture, the street furniture, the interior furniture. You got to put a lot of details because that's where the clues are. So the comic books that are done by guys who are fussy about details are the ones that are the best inspiration for me here. So.
Well, the details are always important in a Sherlock Holmes story.
Yeah. So if you're lazy about drawing buildings, you're like Sherlock Holmes.
Well, there goes my minimalist take on Sherlock Holmes.